Hello, fifth graders. So this is going to be your reading for Johnny Tremain for Thursday, April 23rd. I have decided to do English a little bit differently from here on out, just because I know that you all are probably dealing with a lot of work on your plate, and I don't want to add too much stress to you. So I'm going to be kind of doing it a little bit differently. And don't worry, don't ask questions. I'll explain it next week. On the plus side, something I realized yesterday, we have like 3.5 weeks left of school. I don't really want school to end because I want to see you all first, and I want to be back in the classroom with you all, but I don't think that's going to happen. It's so sad. I miss you all so much, but I will see you all next year, so that's a plus. Well, most of you all. Those of you who I won't see, I'm going to miss you terribly. All right. So a little bit of a recap as to where we left off with Johnny Tremain. Basically, if they were Yankees who were suspected of treason, then they were captured and they were jailed. If they were captured, if most of them got away, Robert Newman was jailed because he was believed to have warned the Yankees as to how the British were coming, and in fact, he did. Uncle Lorne hid in a feather mattress. His wife was pretending to sew up when the British came and invaded their privacy. And now the lights are leaving, and Johnny went there to get, trying to get my computer all set. Johnny went there to get Pumpkin's uniform so that way he could escape. And when he's got there, Seela and Mrs. Bessie or Beezy, whichever one I usually say, were just kind of sitting and the lights were packing up, and he's like, what's going on? And they're like, well, they're going to London. And then Isana was given the choice to either stay with Lavina Light or stay with Seela. And she didn't answer the last time we read. So we're going to start there with Isana's answer. Which would you rather be, a common person like your sister or a fine lady? Fine lady, she sniffed and went on dreamily, and I'll have a gray pony and a pony cart. I've got the gold locket already. Her hand went to her throat. Next, she'd be saying she wanted a little sailboat. Even now, she was only reflecting old desires of Seela's. Isana never could think of up anything for herself. Yes, dear, you will, when I am Lady Prior Morton, and you my little protégé, she explained to the others. I've been betrothed to marry my lord ever since I last came back from London. Papa is a very sick man. He could never live through a civil war over here. Never. He doesn't want to leave all his property to the mob. But what does it matter? My lord is so rich. This miserable house, our ships, shops, are nothing to him, and my lord never liked it that my papa was in trade. Until now, papa would not give up his trade, nor could I bear to leave him. She turned to Seela, and I promise you, I will be in a position to give your sister the best care and training. Training? Said Johnny. What's she going to be trained for? Isana shall be an actress. I would have been myself, but my station in life prevented me. And then I am too tall, and besides, I can't act. Isana shall be the toast of London. You'll be proud some day. Even over here, in the dreary wilderness, you shall hear her name and boast that once you knew it. Sorry, I lost my place. Once you knew her. There we go. Mrs. Bessie said smartly, I'd welcome the day I was proud to know that Izzy, Seela, was not taking the parting as hard as Johnny would have expected. Now he knew that she had been through the worst of it. Months before, when first the two sisters had come to the lights, she had lost Isana long ago. Now, Seela, said Miss Lavina, I want you to have some time alone with Isana. You've been a good girl, Sila, better than Isana, but happens she is what I fancy. Now go with her and help her pack her duds. Sila said nothing, but curtsied and went upstairs with Isana, who was once more sobbing. You too, said Lavina irritably to Mrs. Bessie. You leave me, for I must talk to Johnny alone. Mrs. Bessie heaved herself up out of her comfortable chair and shut the door after her. The young woman sat at last and murmured more to herself than to Johnny. I must talk to you, Jonathan Light Tremaine. Johnny raised his eyes in amazement. I wanted to tell you before we left. First of all, Papa never meant to trick you out of your cup. He honestly thought it was an attempt at swindle. I mean that someone here in Boston stole the cup and then found a boy to pretend to be a long-lost relative and used the cup as proof. Your mother did leave Boston with one of those cups. Papa did not mention that fact in court. There really were 5. He implied no more than 4 ever came through this country. He didn't imply it, said Johnny. He swore it in court. Oh, well, what of it? Let me talk. You see, he never knew that his niece, Vinnie Light, had a child. He had it from your father's family that both she and her husband died of cholera almost as soon as they reached Marseilles. You see, your father was a naval surgeon, a prisoner of war while here in Boston. Oh, nothing very much, she added scornfully. No great fortune or title, and Vinnie Light fell in love with him. He was everywhere in society that year, although a prisoner of war, and, of course, the Lights wouldn't hear of a marriage. He, a Frenchman and a Catholic, and they told her if she ran off with him, she would be cut off and she was never to return. But she did. Vinnie was so wild she went right ahead. Vinnie was so wild she went right ahead. A ship's captain married them. Then his family, of course, would have none of her, she being a heretic. And then he died. They sent word to Papa. Your grandfather was dead, that both had died. But his family sent Vinnie to a convent, hoping the sisters would convert her. And there, 3 months after your father died, you were born. You were born in a convent in the south of France. Odd, isn't it? Sorry, I gotta adjust. Odd, isn't it? Why do you call my mother Vinnie? We all did, Vinnie Light, the wildest, handsomest girl in Boston. I was only a schoolgirl, but she was so beautiful and so happy. Oh, if you could have seen her. But I did. He remembered the sweet and sad face of his sick mother. Was the wild and beautiful Vinnie Light really the same woman? His mother patiently sewing and sewing to keep life in her son's body. She wanted no more life for herself, teaching him to read, making him those smocks. Knowing she had changed so much in such few years, she dared as Mrs. Tremaine return to Boston so her boy could grow up there, learn a decent trade. He thought of her agreeing with Mr. Lapham for his indenture, smiling as she told him, and when she died, he was to go there. When I first saw you, Miss Lavina went on, I noticed one thing, but it set me thinking. I did nothing for a while, but this spring I asked one of my father's captains, bound for Marseilles, to feel about and find out the truth. I did so behind Papa's back. Papa was already too ill to be bothered, but I knew he would want to do right. Like swearing in court, there never were but 4 light cups. She colored angrily. Please let me do the telling. Don't you dare criticize the best man ever lived. Johnny had his own opinion on that. What was the one thing, he asked. The way your hair turns down upon your forehead, that little peak. She was a dark girl. That widow's peak on her was very striking. And then, that day in Mr. Diana's court, I did notice you walked like her, light and wild, like a panther, or, she shrugged, maybe only like a tomcat. I admired my cousin so. I may tend to exaggerate her qualities. And what did your captain find out? What I have just told you. And one thing more, your father, the naval surgeon, was ashamed to be a prisoner of war. He told folks here his name was Latour. That's why your name, Tremaine, meant nothing to us. That is my true name? Yes, but I haven't much time to talk. Only yesterday I told Papa. He's too ill to speak to you himself. He does want you to know that he did not deliberately cheat you, steal your cup. Mother did take it with her. Yes, it belonged to her, and her maid, Mrs. Dinny, went with her. It was Margaret Dinny who got her and you out of the convent and onto a ship her brother commanded, and so to Townsend, Maine. That's where I grew up. I remember Aunt Margaret. She died just before Mother took me to Boston. Yes, and Papa says I am to promise you that he will write the whole thing out in black and white when the war is over. She shrugged. You can put in quite a claim for property, if there's any property left, which I doubt. Anything more you wish to ask me? Yes. What relationship are you to me? What ought I call you? She laughed out loud. Mercy, I don't know. What am I? Why, I suppose I'm sort of a cousin. But you'd better call me Aunt. Aunt Lavina. He said it tentatively. Aunt Lavina? You couldn't even secretly have a romantic passion for an aunt. The queer hold she had had on him for a year snapped. She went to Johnny, stretched out a hand, and touched the widow's peak, all that he had ever got from the beautiful Vinny Light. Then she was gone. Johnny almost forgot the principal reason for his visit to the Lights. He would have liked to sit quietly for a moment, brood over what Miss Lavina had told him. Now was not the time to brood. Selah and Mrs. Bessie came back together. He told them he must have Pumpkin's uniform. Mrs. Bessie said he was not to think of such a thing. If they catch you, Johnny, they will shoot you for impersonating a British soldier in wartime. Lots better men have got shot today, Lexington, Concord. The British are sending boats back and forth tonight, taking off their men from Charleston. I can sneak along over them. No, I forbid you, Johnny. You're going to stay right here and help Selah and me look after the house. I've got to go. Who's going to look out for the light horses if you walk out on us? General Gage has given his word no person or horse or any household gear will be touched, but we need a man to mind the stable. Johnny had an idea. Selah, there is a thing you can do for me. What? Go to the Afric Queen and get my goblin. Take him up here and turn him out to pasture with the light horses. I guess he won't mind being a Tory for a while. Can I ride him? Yes, if you don't mind falling off. I don't mind. She looked excited and pleased. Mrs. Bessie shook her head. And who's to care for the animals? You adding your goblin makes things worse, not better, for us two women folk. The coachman's going with the Lights. Of course, he's English-born. Look here, Mr. Lorne, the printer, he is not what you'd call a coachman, but he was reared on a farm and he's in trouble. British haven't arrested him yet. He hid in a feather bed, but he can't stay there until we've driven the British out of Boston. Couldn't he and his wife and child move up here into the coachman's quarters, and you sort of act as though he'd always worked here? Of course they could. I'd be proud to give them. Selah, just as soon as the Unicorn sails, you go to the Lornes and tell them to come right up and settle in. The girl nodded. Johnny said, if you can get his little press to working again, I think he might like to bring that with him. Go on with his sedition, as they call it. He just about has to print. We can hide his press too. Nobody would dare hunt here for sedition, not after that Gage promised. He'll be a very happy man, and now I've got to go. Seal, where's that uniform of Pumpkin's? I hid it under my bed. I'll fetch it down. Mrs. Bessie shook her head, but she wasn't going to argue any more. How old are you, Johnny? She asked. 16. And what's that, a boy or a man? He laughed. A boy in time of peace and a man in time of war. Well, men have got the right to risk their lives for things they think are worth it. God go with you, my young man. But if they shoot you, remember I warned you. I'll remember all right. Pumpkin had been a little stouter than Johnny. The uniform went on easily. over the boys' breeches and jackets. Mrs. Bessie braided his hair for him and tied it tightly as the British regulars wore theirs. You couldn't say, could you? Selah asked. Why, it is you have to get out tonight. Yes, Dr. Warren told me to. Told me things to watch for and report to him. I've got to find him. And Rab. Rab? The girl's voice sounded frightened. He was with the Lexington men. They stood up at dawn, and the regulars killed quite a few of them. Oh, but Rab! Johnny did not answer immediately. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and Mrs. Bessie was still fussing with his hair. Not once since Dr. Warren had left had he spoken his name. He hadn't dared to let himself begin thinking about him. If he did, he knew he could not think of anything else. Now he had spoken his name, and emotions, fears that he had held in check all day surged up through him. But he said quietly, I've got to find him, so be a good girl, Seal, and mind Mrs. Bessie. He stood up and put on a shiny black hat with a silver cockade on it and saluted smartly. He knew that the last man to wear this uniform had been shot for putting it off, and there was a chance he'd get shot for putting it on. The scarlet tunic with its pale blue facings, the white crossbands on his chest, the white breeches made him feel like a different person. Now he was a private of the King's Own. He felt confident and happy. And Rab? Of course he was all right. You couldn't kill a fellow like Rab with just a handful of bullets. He shook hands with Mrs. Bessie, and because his uniform made him feel grown up, he kissed Selah goodbye, just as he had the Sunday before He kissed Selah goodbye, just as he had the Sunday before seen Rab kiss his aunt. Not at all like a child being kissed by female relatives, but Selah said mischievously, Why, I feel as if I were kissing Pumpkin. So Johnny stalked off down Beacon Hill with the proper martial strut. The littler they are, he thought, the more they strut. The physical act of strutting lifted his spirits, made him feel bigger than he was. Of course, that was why the little fellow do it, and he wondered what had happened to Sergeant Gale. Chapter 12. And we'll actually end there because there's my timer. All right. So, just a little bit of a reminder, don't forget, keep watching because don't forget to take your 5-question quiz. And then on Monday, I will be posting a little bit of a video in the English section telling you about how things are going to be running for the next 3 weeks, okay? So it'll be okay. Just take a deep breath, and I hope to see you all soon. I miss you lots. Bye.